You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad who has been living in my 1997 Ford van for more than a year. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and my guests this week are Brent and Michael, and they are a long-term gay couple who has been traveling the world as digital nomads for the past, about 3 years. And I am really curious about how they decided to make that leap and what countries they've been to, which ones were their favorites. And I hope you guys get a lot out of this conversation as well. So hi, Brent and Michael.
Hello. Hi, Holly. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit of backstory about who you are, maybe like a cute little love story, how you met, or anything that you think pertains.
Go for it. Well, we met more than 25 years ago, which is so hard to believe. I just can't believe it.
Because of how youthful we are.
And in fact, a week after we met, Michael invited me to go to Hawaii with him for a week-long trip. He said, I have a place we could stay free. And I went with him, and I didn't really think about it. We had a great time. So we sort of made the leap into travel right away. And compatibility, we get along pretty well, and we got along pretty well right away. So we had talked a lot about traveling, and we had done as much traveling as we could afford. We're both writers, so we've been struggling artists for a long time.
I get it.
And then, so we talked about this long-term travel thing. But then, Trump was elected, and we were so horrified and appalled, and we said, that thing we've been talking about doing sometime in the future, why don't we do it now? Why, let's just leave the country. Let's sell the house and leave the country. And much to the surprise of our friends, who I think thought we were just blowing off steam,
yep,
we did. And the interesting thing was we had planned to just sort of travel from country to country, and we weren't sure where we would live. We weren't sure, how we would meet people, how much it would afford. Tell the story of how we started. We planned to do it, and then we figured out what it was called.
Well, we had decided, first of all, I want to back up and say, we literally made the decision the night Trump was elected. We were driving home from a friend's election party. Everybody just absolutely crushed. And he turned to me in the car and said, let's sell the house and get out of here. I mean, that is literally how it happened.
And within a month, we sold the house.
And our friends' heads were just absolutely spinning.
I love it.
We decided to do this, and we were thinking, well, I guess we'll stay in Airbnbs. We had to have enough time to put our life in the cloud and organize things. And Brent's dad, is elderly, and we sort of had to get him in order. And so we're making these plans about a year out, and going to do Airbnbs, and we're just going to travel around, and didn't really know exactly how it all worked, but we figured out. And then one Sunday morning, I was reading the Sunday New York Times travel section, and there was this article on something called digital nomads.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't normally read the New York Times travel section. It's a little too ritzy for us, come stay at, Sting's Island hideaway. But I read this article, and they described how there were these people who did this thing called co-living. Mm-hmm. And they would go from place to place and set up shop for 1 to 3 months, however long they were comfortable with. And then they would move on to the next place. And there were whole communities that did this. So I started Googling and reading about digital nomads. And immediately I thought, this is what we want to do. This is who we want to be.
Location independent travelers. And it was like,
work online.
I mean, we knew we wanted to do it, but there was some anxiety about, well, how are we going to be lonely? Is it going to cost a lot? Where are we going to live? How do you get a visa? How do you do this? And then once we read this article and started researching online about the concept of digital nomads, it's like, it reassured us to know people were already doing this. I mean, a lot of people were already doing this, and it was like a whole movement. I mean, since then it has become an even bigger movement.
Yeah.
But it was reassuring to know, and it was also, I kind of like that we made this leap to do this, and we didn't even know what it was. We just did sort of a leap of faith. We'll figure it out. It's like, we'll leave, we'll travel, we'll find a place to live. And I like that even as old as we are, we could just sort of take this leap into the unknown. And then once we did, it wasn't nearly as scary or mystifying as we had worried it might be.
Well, it's funny. Our first year, we had everything mapped out. It was like we were going to start in Miami simply because we had to get out of the Seattle weather. We just had it with the rain up here. So we decided, let's go to Seattle. And from Seattle, we were supposed to go to London. We were going to be in London for several months. And then we had something after that. And we weren't in Miami more than a month when all of our plans for the rest of the year fell apart. So we had to start scrambling on what to do. Mm-hmm. And it very quickly sort of got us thinking about things in a more adaptable way than we had been. You know, it was like, you can't plan everything out. You've got to be more flexible and adaptable than we had initially thought. And it turned out we were pretty good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to be, even if you don't start out that way, if you start out really rigid, you know, you have a whole year planned out. That is a long time. I think
too long.
It's a very long time. I think that adaptability is definitely a survival skill regardless, you know.
There's this idea, because I think the only peg people have in their brains to hang this concept on is being on vacation, being on holiday. And being on holiday, well, holidays are great. They can also be stressful. You're moving around a lot and you have a lot of stimuli and you're out of your comfort zone. And so there's this idea that, well, doing that full time must be really, really stressful.
Yeah.
And this is what I would have thought too. And I guess the first couple of months as we were figuring things out, there was a learning curve we were on. But the reality of it is, I feel like my life is so much less stressful now than it was when we were living. It's partly maintaining a house in Seattle, which was a really expensive city. So therefore we felt we had to work. We did have to work, literally had to work to pay for healthcare and all of that. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I didn't anticipate is America is the only country whose priorities are such that you always have to be busy. The rest of the world looks at us like we're crazy because we are crazy. Yep. And in the rest of the world, they have a much more leisurely lifestyle. And this is true even rich country, poor country. They appreciate life. They appreciate food. They appreciate music. They appreciate personal contact. So once we got out of the American mindset that you should be overworked and stressed and worried about money, because literally you have to be worried about money because everything's so expensive, healthcare. Once we got out of that, and then, you move to a new country, there's a week where you're becoming familiar with the local mores and customs and what's the currency and how do you ride a bus and what do you eat and where's the grocery store and do you use a bike or a scooter or a Uber or whatever, how do you get around? And once that first week is over, then it becomes your new home. And I would not have believed me, the me of 4 years ago would not have believed me now, but our life is so much less stressful now than it was back then.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I agree that the U.S. has a very unhealthy, toxic relationship with hustle and being busy and that sort of thing. And I mean, I know that I subscribe to it myself. I'm like, oh, I have to be doing something productive. I have to be doing something that's going to make me money or make a difference, or,
hard to shake.
It's really hard to shake. And I've gotten better at it. But even still, like if I find myself with like a free afternoon on like as a surprise, I'm like, oh, I could read my book, but that sounds too indulgent. I'm going to clean the house first or something, which in a van, it takes about 30 seconds to clean the house. But then I did something productive and then I can be indulgent and read a book. But I think it's just part of growing up in this culture. And I think that's really refreshing that other countries don't have that. And I bet that was pretty hard to kind of get used to.
It wasn't, because you realize when you leave the country, the pressure in America, it is cool to be too busy. Mm-hmm. That is, people look at you, oh my gosh, you're too busy. You must be really important. You must be so cool. And people sort of humble brag about how busy they are. Mm-hmm. And in the rest of the world, it's sort of reversed, that people look at you like you're working again, or you're not coming out to dinner because you have, it's cool to not be overwhelmed and depressed and anxious. And you're sort of looked at askance if you have that American attitude.
Yeah.
So on one hand, it was weird to adjust to, but on the other hand, the adjustment happened quickly because, everybody wants to fit in to some degree. Everybody wants to be cool, and they don't want people looking at them like they're crazy.
That's definitely true to a certain extent. But I mean, we also have made a point to acknowledge there are plenty of people in America who have to work really hard because America is an expensive country.
Yep.
And there are people working 2 or 3 jobs to try and pay their bills. It's a certain like Amazon employee is the one who's like, oh my God, I have to work so hard all the time. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is the United States is incredibly expensive. I mean, one of the reasons we want to get the heck back out of here is, our rents are just so expensive. And America, part of what goes in hand with that lifestyle of working so hard is the materialism. And we weren't, I don't think we were typical Americans when we had our house, but we had a house and it was filled with stuff and you had to have stuff in it. And all that stuff seemed important. And after about 2 months on the road, if you had sat me down and said, Michael, make a list of what it is you really missed from having that house. What have you given up that you've lost?
Yeah.
I would have been hard pressed. And now, after living out of a suitcase for 2.5 years, it's like, I don't want that stuff. I don't want the burden of buying it and paying for it and storing it and caring for it. It's easy now. And what I have gained in giving up the stuff is so worth it.
I feel like we've given up anything.
No.
Yeah. I think that's true. You spend money on the thing that you bought, and then you have to spend money and energy maintaining the thing that you bought, whether it's, regular cleaning or, some other kind of maintenance, like certain furnitures need, or technology, or cleaning out your gutters. Like these things, you pay for them and then you have to keep paying for them forever.
My dad is from South Dakota, and he knew this author who wrote a book called Dakota, and she was a ex-nun who wrote about the beauty of monastery living. And so I've been hearing this. My dad's sort of been into this, and I've been hearing this my whole life. And then, that segued into the simple living movement. All these people, only do the things that bring you joy, get rid of everything else. And I always sort of rolled my eyes at that. That's ridiculous. And then once it was sort of forced on us by default, because as a digital nomad, literally everything you own you have to carry with you. So if you buy something new, you have to get rid of something old. And your life has to be in perfect balance. Otherwise, you break your back because you are carrying too much stuff. Literally. So everything you own becomes intentional. It's like, it's not so much, does this bring me joy? It's like, does this have a purpose? Do I want this? Do I use it? And if you don't, you very quickly decide you don't want to carry it with you. And so there is this harmony that happens by default. I don't really get any, I don't think I deserve credit because our lifestyle forces us to do this. But I have discovered that this author that I used to roll my eyes at, talking about monastery living and self-deprivation and a freedom and a joy, and all of that is suddenly making sense. It's like, it's really true. And these possessions, in fact, they don't liberate you, they wear you down. And interesting self-realization.
Yeah. I heard a quote. I can't remember who said it, but it wasn't me, so I'm not taking credit. Everything you own owns you.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. You said that after 2 months, you would be hard pressed to make a list of the things that were important in the house that you gave up. Do you think, was that transition? You made it really rapidly. You decided on election night that you were moving, and a month later you sold your house. Was that like the very beginning of being digital nomads? Was it an easy transition, or was it kind of like what have we done?
It was shockingly easy.
Yeah.
And maybe part of the reason for that is, I think it would have been true no matter where we went, but our first stop was Miami. Yeah. So it was, we weren't in a foreign country. We weren't dealing with foreign currencies. So that part was easy. The interesting part of our life being so different is we were living in a place called Rome, which was a co-living facility. We had our own private room and bathroom, but we shared a kitchen, shared all the common space. So we'd gone from the two of us living in, the rainy Northwest, where you spent a lot of time by yourself, to living in a group situation. And we adapted to it so quickly and enjoyed it so fast. I think it was the first month we looked at each other and said, this was the smartest thing we ever did.
It may have been the first week.
Yeah. The stuff issue never came up. But there was never a minute where we were like, oh my God, I miss our stuff.
But I think the reason why it worked out so well for us in particular, so digital nomads, I refer to it as the island of misfit toys, because nobody picks up and leaves home if they're happy or satisfied. The reason why you leave home or you leave your country to travel the world is because you feel like you didn't quite fit in, you were the black sheep, you're unhappy, there's something out beyond the horizon that you must see.
Adventurous.
So you get these people together, and over again, we heard the story that, oh yeah, I didn't fit in back home, I was teased, I was a geek, I was the dork, I was the misfit. And of course, this was us too. So ironically, even though we were meeting, even in Miami, most of the people were international travelers, people from Italy, people from Brazil, people from Norway, people from Finland. So we're meeting all these people, and what they're saying and the values that they have aligned more closely to what we had always thought than even, not so much our friends back in Seattle, but the Seattle social environment. Suddenly these people are espousing these things we've always believed. And so it felt like we had finally discovered a place where we fit in for the first time in our lives. I've always felt like an oddball. I felt like an oddball in Seattle with all the programmers, among the when I go to Los Angeles, all the beautiful people in the screen. I'm a screenwriter. When I go to New York in the publishing industry, I feel like I don't fit in there. But finally, we're among these people, and even though we don't share a common country or a common cultural background, I relate to them more than anybody else I've ever related to. And so suddenly we had all these connections. And I think, honestly, that's part of the reason why it was so easy to feel like we could do this and fit in, because we did.
Yeah. So you fit in right away, but it wasn't necessarily because of a place. It was because of the people. And then everywhere you've gone over the last 2.5 years has been based on, like, you still have that feeling because of the people that you meet rather than the
Absolutely.
The people you meet. It's interesting you mentioned that. One of the things that we did not expect and has been absolutely fascinating to discover is that we thought we might be lonely when we started this. And even when you're in, your digital nomad place, Miami or Bansko, Bulgaria, or Chiang Mai in Thailand, you have a community there of people you get to hang out with. But what we didn't realize is you develop this worldwide community, and now everywhere we go, we either have friends there, almost always have friends, or friends of friends who will put us in touch. When we were in Mexico City just a couple months ago, I was walking down the street. We were walking down the street, and all of a sudden this voice on the other side of the street goes, "Michael!" And I turned around and I looked. I was like, Avi, who I hadn't seen for a year. Last saw him in Bulgaria. And so we ran into him there, and we were already there with several of the digital nomad friends. So
we were at dinner in Tbilisi, Georgia once with some other friends, some other nomad friends. And he brought a friend who had brought a date who we had met in Thailand the year before. So it's like, on one hand, I mean, it's a little scary how small the world is. But the other thing that I will add is, in some countries, not in all countries, like if we don't speak the native language, sometimes it is hard to become really friends with local people, although it's alarming how many people speak English. But in some countries, we are fortunate to meet local friends too. In Italy, and that happened in Italy, it happened in Vietnam, it happened in Tbilisi, Georgia, it happened in Mexico City. So the places we visited are, so we went Miami, we lived in Malta, we lived in southern Italy, we lived in Bulgaria, we lived in Switzerland, we went to Thailand, Vietnam, Mexico, and then lots of cities. Tbilisi, Georgia. Lots of cities like Barcelona, lots of cities along the way where we stay a week or two. But those are the countries that we've lived in for at least a month. Yeah, a month is the shortest, about 3 months is the longest.
Is there any rhyme or reason to how you choose where you're going to go next?
It used to be we'd read about something online. Now it is almost always word of mouth. A friend of ours says they're going somewhere or they've heard something good. Occasionally, the New York Times does an annual list of 75 places you need to visit. And I looked at it this year, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that we'd been to 46 of them, I think, between the last 3 years and the time before.
And for environmental reasons, we try and pick an area of the world and then stay there so that we're not jetting back and forth. We do have, not to criticize other nomads, but there are some nomads who will be like a month in Asia, and then they want to go to Europe, and then they're in America, and then they're done. And it's like, that's a lot of flying out there.
And we try to travel between continents via boat.
Yeah.
We'll take a boat, which the way we do the numbers, that the
a cruise ship
carbon footprint is considerably less than if we were to fly. So we're conscious of it. I mean, ultimately, that is the criticism to be made of this, because we do have a carbon footprint because we do occasionally fly.
But it's funny,
and we probably should be shamed a little bit about that, but we do our best.
In terms of where we choose, when we set out, it was the very obvious safe countries. It was like, we'll go to Miami, we'll go to Malta, we'll go to Italy, we were going to go to London. And that first year, because of how things panned out in terms of running out of visa time, we wound up going to Bulgaria. in Eastern Europe. And
I remember seeing your pictures from Bulgaria. It looks beautiful.
It is amazing.
Beautiful.
It is
It's
amazing.
beautiful.
But if you had told us when we were in Miami that in less than a year we'd be living in Bulgaria, because of our narrow view at that point, we're children of the Cold War. Bulgaria was, communist behind the Iron Curtain, very mysterious. It felt like it would have to be very backward. Like, I'm not going to be living in Bulgaria.
Well,
and then we went to Bulgaria, and of course it's basically a modern country. It's got its differences and its issues, but beautiful and unspoiled and nice people. And so now
Underappreciated.
We're so much more adventurous.
Well, we were in Armenia last year, and so a friend of ours had just come back from Iran. A Georgian friend had just come back from Iran. He vacationed in Iran. He said it was beautiful. And we were in Armenia, and we were about 20 kilometers from the border with Iran. Armenia was fascinating. Loved it. It was really interesting. Very poor, but very interesting. And our driver was saying, "Oh, do you want to go into Iran?" And on one hand, we couldn't, because it would be on our passport, and that's a no-go for an American citizen. And they also check Facebook social media profiles, and as a gay couple, you don't want to go into Iran. But that said, the idea of going into Iran, because we just had a lovely dinner with a friend who'd just come from Iran, and it didn't seem scary at all. And it's funny how the year before, Armenia had seemed so exotic and scared.
That's interesting. Have you been to any countries where being a gay couple has been a thing, good or bad?
Well, that's interesting. We were worried about that with Bulgaria. That was the first place we sort of thought, oh, this is Eastern European and communist, and went there. And, we mentioned it we checked in with the co-working place, and the first place we lived, it was like, we're a gay couple, because we didn't want any weirdness, and never had anything. And then Tbilisi, Georgia is considered one of the most homophobic countries in Europe. Okay. And so we did our due diligence before we went there, but we were told, it's pretty homophobic, but you're going to be fine, especially in Tbilisi. And we got there and never had an issue, which isn't to say for local people there aren't problems, and it is a country that's a little bit behind the terms. But there's something we coined called the weird foreigner rule. You're a weird foreigner, you're already outside the norms, so
they don't really apply the local mores. And I would also say, we are two white men who are perceived to be wealthy. So there is this presumption that you don't want to, and plus, to give us a little bit of credit, we always try to be respectful of local customs. I mean, when we were in Thailand, there were a lot of European tourists. It was Thailand, this part of Thailand happened to be not quite predominantly Muslim, but there was a large Muslim community there. And I noticed there were a lot of Europeans going topless on the beach and not really respecting the local norms. And we wouldn't do that. It's like, we are guests in this country, and we will be respectful. I mean, we're not going to sacrifice our own dignity, and we're not going to accept, oppression or anything like that. But at the same time, we're going to be mindful of local mores. There was a big Instagram scandal last year of this gay couple their shtick was to, moon the camera in these different sites, and then they mooned the camera in a holy site in Cambodia, and the locals didn't appreciate that. And in that case, I side with the locals. It's like, you are a guest, and you need to be mindful, and you need to be respectful. And even if you don't think this is holy, this site is holy, you absolutely need to appreciate that other people do. I mean, that feels like just basic common sense and basic common humanity.
And we weighed the idea of going to Tbilisi and thinking, are we going there and are we supporting a homophobic culture? Is this something we don't want to do? Or are we going to go there and, mostly be ourselves? We didn't really change anything, and get to know some of the gay community and expose them to, oh, here's this gay couple that is, wow, they're really normal. And our attitude, we felt like our presence there was more of a pro than it was a con. And in fact, we got to know the leading gay rights activists in Georgia. And we wrote an article about him and talked about him in our website and helped give them exposure. So I feel like there's ways you can do things. I mean, I don't know if I would go to Iran at this point when they've been executing gay people and some awful way. You do have to weigh those things. But
right.
For us, we are aware of these issues. We think about them. We don't just go off and think, oh, we're Americans. We can do what we want. We're aware of our privileges.
So we had spent, when you minus out taxes and everything, we had spent about $85,000 a year living in Seattle, owning and maintaining a house. And frankly, I think that's the median in Seattle, but we were in the center of the city, and we felt poor. I mean, I don't want to say we were poor, but that was not a lavish lifestyle in Seattle. Yeah. So it was important to me, since I did the finances, I didn't want to go beyond that and the travels. I didn't want to spend more than that. But I was comparing travels to being on holiday and thinking, how can Airbnbs, hotels are really expensive. So the upshot was, the first year we spent $52,000, and that was, we spent 2 months on a cruise ship, and we spent 3 months in Miami, and we spent a couple of months in Switzerland, which is very expensive, and we still came in at $52,000. The second year, and we were not trying to save money. The second year it came in at $42,000, and I mean, we have a lot of friends who make a point, like they're trying to retire early, and so they stay only in by Western standards, cheaper countries like Thailand or like Tbilisi, Georgia, and they can live comfortably. I mean, comfortably. I don't feel like we really deprive ourselves of anything as we travel, except maybe the luxury travel. As Michael said, it is a massive form of privilege, but it is also the reality that, they're happy we're there. They're happy that we're spending our money there. But it's win-win for...
And unlike a lot of people who go on vacation for 2 weeks and they go to the Hyatt or whatever resort that's owned by a big corporation, we're living locally. I mean, we're, for the most part, either doing co-living, which is a local independent business, or doing co-working, same thing, often renting local apartments. I mean, in Bulgaria, they've lost like 3 million people of their population has moved to Western Europe. So they've got housing going begging, and they need people to come in. And like I said, when we come in, we're not eating out at fancy restaurants. We're eating out at the local, Georgian restaurants where other people are eating. So because we've asked these questions. I mean, living in Thailand was one of the few places where we actually lived in a more touristy location. It was a lot of Europeans. And, we asked ourselves the question, and for our website, we asked ourselves the question, is this a good or a bad thing? Is this healthy for us to be here for the local economy? And I did research that talked about how tourism is a huge plus for the most part in these places. So we try and be aware of these issues, and we try and do our best to do this responsibly. Because there's nothing more obnoxious, and we've seen this happen, where a digital nomad will be in X poorer country, and they'll be like, I can live like a king here. It's so great.
Or they travel around trying to avoid taxes, so they really benefit from, and we don't do that. We make a point. Obviously everybody needs to decide these things for themselves. And I don't think on a lot of things there are clear answers, but I do think it's important to at least consider these questions, because I think they are important. Everybody comes to different conclusions, but we give it a lot of thought.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's definitely something that I think about too. Like, I mean, I don't go out to eat very often, but when I do, I prefer it not to be a chain restaurant. I'd rather support somebody local. And that's true like in any kind of shopping that I do. But then you also have to be mindful of, your own budget. Like if I had an unlimited budget, I would support so many more, small businesses and be supportive of so many other small economies. But at the same time, like if it's a lifestyle, like the way you guys are doing it, it benefits you and you have a better experience if you fully immerse yourself in the country and in the culture. And that's something that you're able to do if you live the way that you're living. And if you're taking a vacation and you're getting like a week or two, like total break from your reality, like maybe your priorities are different.
Yeah, it's a different experience.
Yeah, I'm on team immersion myself.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, the financial part of it, I think a lot of people, they think, oh, well, how could I get a remote job? And I mean, that's true. One needs to be able to have some skill that can be done remotely. But of course, there's a huge market just for teaching English, and you don't necessarily need experience. But the other part of it is you don't need to make as much money as you do in the United States. People, I don't think I would have understood that. So you can work less and therefore enjoy life more. And as you say, really get to know the local cultures. I mean, it's funny. I mean, this conversation, we could talk for this for 10 hours, but just in terms of being back in the United States, everything, so many of the debates we have, obviously, because we're in America, they come from this American perspective.
Yeah.
So you go outside the United States and you realize, oh, all of these assumptions I had are not necessarily shared by Europeans, I mean, on whatever the issue is. So therefore, I mean, there are a lot of things in the United States that I've sort of rolled my eyes at over there. It's like simple living. And then when I'm forced to defend it, or somebody, wants to know about it, then I have to ask myself, well, what do I believe? What are my values? And that same sort of questioning doesn't happen in the United States about a lot of issues, because everybody has the same set of assumptions. But you go outside the other world, you go outside the border, and things shift. And I find myself, there are things that I've dismissed in the United States that are then dismissed outside of the country, and my hackles sort of rise. They talk about, just the whole concept of white privilege. In Europe, they talk about social justice and race and prejudice in very, very, very different ways than we do in the United States. And one could say, well, they're behind us, which I think is the wrong way to look at it. You could also say, well, they just have a different point of view. And there are people of goodwill and intelligence that are looking at it from a different angle. And that was certainly true dealing with gay people in other countries. Sometimes we'll look at the way, because many times they will feel that they can't come out to their friends and family, and they literally can't come out because the oppression is such. But then we'll ask them, well, are you oppressed? And they're like, no, I'm not oppressed. That's my private life. Why does my family need to know my private life? And we will think to ourselves, well, you are oppressed. You just don't know it yet. You're not woke. And then, of course, you take a step back and you think, well, that's incredibly condescending. I mean, you have to be open to the reality of their experience. And then it forces you to question what you believe. And I mean, it's been wonderful, because if you start to think you have all of the answers in anything, you are humbled very, very quickly, because you will see there are so many different ways to view these things and so many different paths to hopefully what will be the truth. And just the mere fact that you have to question your assumption and you have to, do I really believe that? I do believe that. And this is why I believe it. And this is why I think you should believe it too. But there have been times when things are said to me, it's like, oh, I guess I don't quite believe that. I agree with this person, that I met in Tbilisi.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's a super important point. The more you travel, even if you can't, you feel like you can't leave whatever country you're in, for whatever reason, still traveling within your own country and meeting other people who were maybe raised, you guys went from Seattle to Miami. Those are both in the United States, but the cultures of both of them are very different.
It's true.
So doing the traveling that you can do within your country is really important. And then if you can't, we have this thing called the internet, and being able to learn as much as you can about other people and how they think and what they believe, I think is really important to be a well-rounded citizen of the earth.
And then it's fascinating because something like COVID-19 comes along, and the differences in how people think about freedom and independence and community and what's important is laid out in these starkest terms. I mean, it was shocking to be in Texas. Well, we had friends who were both in Spain and Argentina, and they're describing their, how people are behaving in the pandemic and how they're leaning outside in Spain and in Argentina. In the beginning of it, at 8:00 every night, they were opening their windows and cheering all the health workers. And here in the United States, we're arguing about whether or not we should be wearing face masks.
But at the same time, traveling the world, you discover this concept of day workers, where they work a day and they make money, and that is the money they use to feed themselves and their family. And then you start to understand, they don't have unemployment insurance or any sort of healthcare. So it's like, if they can't work, they don't eat, and their family doesn't eat. So therefore, they're out doing the street food in Mexico City or in Thailand or whatever, even when there's COVID-19 in the air, because they have no choice. And it is sort of, I think there's been a lot of talk about privilege in the United States. It's all really healthy and important. But there's American privilege too. I mean, there's white privilege and there's American privilege, and seeing it literally getting to know these people and becoming friends with these people and realizing how they live their lives, and all these things that you thought you were so woke on and you thought you understood so well, the reality of it comes crashing down, and you're just sort of overwhelmed by American privilege, because it is just colossal compared to the rest of the world.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this, and I know, Brent, just didn't say it. I mean, there are plenty of Americans who don't have the privilege where they can't work day to day. I mean, there are people, or they have to work day to day. You know, there's people who've been working in the animal slaughterhouses and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that privilege spreads all around the world, and something, you know, we're aware of in both places as well. But it is even more stark overseas.
I mean, half of Mexico City is day laborers. It's a city of 21 million people. So you've got 10.5 million people that have no safety net at all. And, you know, some of whom are our friends now. And so it is sort of, you know, you take it personally when Trump blusters about how hard Americans have it, and America first, and the rest of the world is taking advantage of Americans. Like, are you crazy? I mean, that's literally the opposite of reality. Americans have it so, I mean, you know, as Michael said, it's true. There are plenty of Americans who have it rough too, but whew, boy, that gets my hackles up these days.
Yeah. Where were you guys when coronavirus started?
We were in Mexico City when it started. And Brent, actually, it's funny, I'm normally the one who pays attention to, you know, diseases and things like that, just for various reasons. And this came along. I remember Brent saying, "Oh, there's this new virus out of China that I think is going to be serious." And I had taken bird flu back in the aughts. I thought this was going to be a big deal. And I looked at him and said, "It's not going to be anything. This is not." It was kind of indicating, because we were in Mexico City with a group of about 6. There were 6 of us all together, and so we would eat out regularly, you know, a couple of times a week. And I would give an update on what I was reading about. Wasn't when it was coronavirus then, not COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like they didn't, you know, they thought I was being a little hysterical, maybe a lot hysterical. So as things unfolded, I think I can be hysterical, and I do think I can be alarmist. But in this one case, you know, I think they dismissed me the first time, and then more and more people were talking about it, and there was more in the news. And we were supposed to go to Oaxaca together, and Brent and I said, "No, we're going to get out of the country," and they were still going to go. And then one by one, they were like, "Yeah, we think we're going to get out of here too." And then it became, you know, obvious how much more serious it was. So it was from Mexico City. One of our friends who we were with in Mexico City, her parents have a second house in Texas, on the Austin suburbs. I mean, literally on the edge of suburbs to rural. Yeah. And they had a house, and they said, you know, "Come stay with us." So we did that for 2.5 months, which was really nice. It was a nice house. We got to spend more time with our friends. Unlike so many people who were in situations where they couldn't really go many places, we had fields outside where we could walk in. And so we did that for 2.5 months. And then it was, you know, you don't want to overstay your welcome. Right. And then on top of it, it was shocking how badly the Texans were doing. And so we thought we'd come back to Washington State, and that's where we've been. And even here, we're not in Seattle. We're staying in more rural locations.
It has been interesting, though, you know, talking to our nomad friends, it was an easy adjustment, you know, because this is what we do. Working remotely is what we all do. Right. And so a lot of people, you know, that first transition period, it was tough for a lot of people, and I get that. But it's less tough for us. And
the only thing that's missing, the only thing that's different about our life, and this is only true in Texas, it's not true here, because we are able to go on hikes and bike rides or at social distancing. But the only difference between our old life and being in Texas was we really couldn't go very many places. We never went into Austin. We took a couple day trips out. Whereas in Mexico City, you know, every weekend and sometimes several times a week, we'd go explore, you know, a great new museum or a local cultural spot.
We do miss the food. And pretty much, I've come to the conclusion that everyone in the world takes food more seriously than America. You know, Americans are very easily satisfied with, you know, lots of salt and lots of sugar. And the rest of the world, first of all, they appreciate food, and food is a social event. Meals are a social event, and everybody gets together and they talk for 2 hours. And that did require a bit of a mental leap. That was, you know, Americans wolf their food while sitting at their desk. And for example, when we were in Italy, you know, they would take a break every day for lunch that would be an hour or two and mid-afternoon. And definitely had to make a mental leap there. But of course, once you do, you know, you're in Italy and you're having, you know, these wonderful Italian friends cook you lunch every day, or going out to lunch at a restaurant every day. That was, looking back, it seems silly that I hesitated at all, because it was pretty great.
It is interesting how trapped we feel now because of COVID. I mean, we really want to get out of the United States, both because we had made the decision to be traveling the world. That had become our life. It sort of feels like a limb has been cut off, but also because of how badly it's being handled. And what's going on politically, and having to. We always stayed politically aware outside of the country. We saw what was going on, but here it's like we've been thrown right back into
this is a particularly important, contentious time, stressful time.
2020 has been a weird year, and on the one hand, we are halfway through it, and I don't know how we got here. And on the other hand, we still have 6 months to go.
But I feel optimistic for the first time in a long time, because I feel like one way or another, the world is being reset, and I think we will have a chance to start over. And I'm hoping that we'll move into the light, not back into the darkness. But it feels to me like finally, you could sort of sense in the air these last few years that something was brewing, something really serious was going to happen. Yes. And now it's happened.
Yeah, well, you guys knew it on election night, as did half of the rest of the country. We all knew there was something on its way. So I do want to ask you guys about being digital nomads as a couple. It sounds like you've been traveling since week 1 of your relationship.
Right.
But I've been a digital nomad in a van in the United States as one person, and that comes with its own challenges, but I don't have to agree with anybody else on where I go or how I do things. Did that dynamic change? You guys had already been together for 20 some odd years before you made the leap to be digital nomads. But did things change at all when you hit the road, or was it just business as usual? Your relationship is great. Everything is fine.
Well, for us, we'd already been working and living at home together. It's not like we had separate jobs. We went out during the day, and all of a sudden we had this dynamic where we're together a whole lot more than before. That was pretty much our life already. So that part wasn't difficult at all. In terms of deciding where to go, I don't think we've had, I really want to get back to Australia. I haven't gotten him down there yet. But other than that, we've never really had a disagreement about where we're going or what we're going to do.
It is true. As you say, there are pros and cons to being single, and there are pros and cons to being a couple.
Yeah.
And it is true that, in a lot of places we have to share a hotel room. So it's like a studio, like there's not even a bedroom. So there's, no personal space, and we are around each other 24/7. Usually, frequently we will rent an apartment, and then there's a co-working space, and one can be in the co-working, one can be in the apartment. So we do have, and we've made that sort of work. We have privacy, and we have our own lives. And the other aspect is, I think we are, it perplexes me, but we are more social now. We're way more social now than we ever were in Seattle. And it's partly because, you don't have to drive an hour to meet somebody for dinner and then drive an hour home, and everybody's not so busy. Everybody, and the cost of restaurants is usually so much cheaper. So we find ourselves socializing and having outside friends.
I think another part of that is other digital nomads want to have similar experiences to what we do. Whereas when we lived in Seattle, trying to get together with friends for a weekend evening, much less a weekend or a week, was really difficult. But when you're a digital nomad, everybody's interested in having very similar experiences. So we were living in Tbilisi. Our good friends Casey and Gillian were like, we want to do a road trip down to Armenia. And it's like, oh, well, we're all digital nomads. We all have flexible schedules. Let's go. We can do this. And so that's been our reality, as opposed to our old reality where it's like, well, it's hard to do things. And, as Brent said, we're so much more social in deeper ways than we used to be.
In Seattle, you work and then you take a vacation to sort of refill the well so you can work again. The priority is work, and vacation is what you do, on the weekends to rest. But it's absolutely flipped. Yeah, it's flipped both internationally and among the nomad community, that you work to support your lifestyle, but ultimately the goal is to have fun and to play and to make connections and to see things and appreciate the world. And I think that's way more in sync with our personal values. But in terms of a couple, we have both also changed dramatically. Michael always considered himself a loner. I was a bit of a workaholic. So we have both gone on our own sort of trajectories, our character arcs over the last couple of years. But it's been a good thing that in spite of the changes, hopefully we still like each other. And so it hasn't been, I think we chose wisely all those years ago that we shared really basic values. And so there haven't been any of those core conflicts because of that, hopefully.
Yeah.
It's also been fun. We've been on exactly the same page about nomading, that Michael has been worried at times that, say we'll have a bad experience, we'll get food poisoning, or we'll get lost in an airport, or we'll miss a flight or whatever, and we'll be in foul mood. And it used to be that Michael would think, because I'm the less adventurous of the two, I'm the more practical of the two of us, and I think Michael would think, oh, well, this is it. Brent's going to want to, he's going to want to go home now. He's going to give it up, and that's never happened. We've always been on exactly the same page, even in stressful moments.
Yeah.
Which has been nice.
I think that's really important. I mean, life is stressful. And then if you throw yourself into those challenging situations where you're going to be moving to a new place and uprooting your life every month or 3, and you're going to go someplace where maybe you don't speak the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know anybody else who's there. I mean, that puts stress on you. And to be able to communicate and be patient and empathetic and loving with each other is, a testament to your relationship, because we've all been in airports or bus stations or malls where you see those couples who are not having that patience.
Well, we've been that couple once or twice. But
it's funny. You talk about the stress of doing all those things, and honestly, once you make the leap mentally, it's really not that stressful. Well, we'll go to a new city, and it'll be strange for 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. But then all of a sudden we know it, and it's home, and we become very comfortable there. And honestly, after at least 2 months, after about 2 months, but up to 2 months, I start to get bored. And it's like, I want to go see something new and interesting.
Why do people live their whole life in the same place? That's what
I wonder how we did it. Honestly, now it's like, I love living in Seattle all those years, but looking back, part of me is like, how did I put up with doing the same things over and over?
So we were talking with a digital nomad friend not long ago, and she was describing, it's like there's not a word for this feeling, but it's such a distinct digital nomad feeling. And it's the feeling that when you get onto a bus and you don't know the protocol, it's like, do you pay in cash? Do they make change? Do you need a ticket? Do you pay when you get on? Do you pay when you get off? What's the language? Do you exit the front or the back? There's this moment of discomfort where you don't know how the local system works. Yeah. You have to look and see what other people do. And even then it's awkward. It's like, am I going to do it wrong? Am I going to be embarrassed? I'm going to hold up the line, and we've all, this happens fairly frequently. But the beauty of traveling as a couple is there's 2 of us now. We're never really alone in those circumstances. And I remember Heathrow is a mess of an airport, and we needed, when you have to change plane, we have to go through customs and then get to the other airline and you take a city subway and a different terminal, and we had to get to a flight, and it was really complicated, and unfortunately it was in English. It was really complicated. We were trying to figure it out. We're both on our phones, and it was nice that we could, it looks like we take this subway to this, and then we do this, and then we can change our ticket, and it was like we could check in with each other, and there wasn't like that moment of panic, like I don't know what to do.
And you're in there on your own, but you have
so that feeling is always uncomfortable when you've got somebody that you can bounce ideas off of it. It's like 70% less awkward, because you're not alone. So that is the beauty of traveling with somebody.
Oh man, I fully understand both of those feelings. So when the world opens back up and you guys are able to go anywhere that you want to go again, when having an American passport means you get to go places, where would you like to see? What are your future destinations?
It's funny. There's nowhere that's not a destination now, which is very different from when we started. We had kind of a limited American view of what travel meant. London, and now it's like I have become fascinated with, we both have actually, with northern India. It sounds like there's some amazing places up in northern India that nobody goes down to. And down in southern India, there's a state called Kerala, or Kerala, that is incredibly beautiful. And then there's all the stands in Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe is stunning, and it has not. Americans don't know that yet because it hasn't become trendy. So maybe we shouldn't talk about it. But it's beautiful and pristine, and it's almost a land that time forgot because of the Soviet occupation. A lot of there's this 19th century lovely villages and pristine forests that have been left alone for hundreds of years. We want to go to Kathmandu. We want to go We want to go to Cambodia. We want to go to Sri Lanka. That's next. We want to go back to Thailand. We loved Vietnam.
There's a
go to Tokyo.
There's a concept of over tourism, that there are certain places that everybody wants to go to, and we have certainly been to those places, but we have discovered over time we don't like those places as much. I mean, partly because they're so crowded, and they're those things are so famous. They're way up here. They're the best things in the world to see, and what people don't realize is just down here, just underneath those, are all these other places that are equally fascinating, or almost as fascinating, without the expense and the crowds. We were in Rome last year, and we were there in October, and it was still incredibly crowded. We went to the Colosseum, which we'd been to 20 years before, and it was a mosh pit. It was just incredibly unpleasant experience.
Oh boy!
And then the next day happened to be my birthday, and Brent was like, "Well, what do you want to do on your birthday?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really. We've seen the stuff here in Rome. I don't know, and I don't have any big things." And Brent had heard about this town called Tivoli. It was about a 40-minute train ride outside of Europe. And he said, "There's some interesting stuff here. Why don't we go?" And so we went there. I'd never heard of it. I'm pretty well read internationally and like ancient history. I'm aware of most interesting places to go, so I thought. And so we went to Tivoli, and it's this fascinating, beautiful town that you don't hear nearly as much about. And it was this fantastic experience, partly because my expectations weren't the Eiffel Tower or Paris. It was like, this Italian town. And partly because it was this fantastic place that just doesn't feel as discovered. So to answer your question, everywhere is on the table right now. I mean, we're so open to different and interesting things.
We were one of the similar experiences to what Michael's saying. We were in Ireland, and there are 3 peninsulas in southern Ireland. There's the Ring of Kerry, which is the popular one where everybody goes. There's the Dursey Peninsula, and then there's Barra Peninsula. So there's 3 of them. And we went to all 3, and the Ring of Kerry was absolutely the pits.
Tour buses,
the worst. Dursey Peninsula, is that the right?
Dorsey. I'm not sure.
I don't remember. But that was okay. That was a little better. And the Barra Peninsula, there was nobody there, and it was one of the most magical experiences. There's at the end of the peninsula, there's this cable car that takes you to an island, population 9, this ancient cable car. Oh. We were the only people who'd ridden it that day.
And you hike out to the end, and you have this stunning view out over the Atlantic, and way out in the distance is this little tiny island that's got a lighthouse on it. And so we had the whole thing to ourselves. Beautiful sunlight, beautiful sunny Irish day. It was amazing.
It is partly a question of expectations. But the world is a beautiful place. And there's so much to see. And if you go a little bit off the beaten track, it's as beautiful, if not more beautiful. And plus you have that feeling of discovery,
Just yesterday on a Nomad thread I was on, an American had commented, it's not so bad being trapped in the United States because we have the most beautiful, scenery to see here. And I couldn't help myself but chime in and say, after 3 years of traveling the world, our scenery is no more or no less beautiful than anywhere else. I mean, I dislike that American attitude of, ours is the best. And I suppose that's true of every country, but our experience has been, we haven't been to a country that wasn't amazing in some way or another.
That's the other mental leap that you have to make, that every culture, at least all the ones that we've experienced, is extraordinarily beautiful in multiple ways. And also there are ways that sort of frustrate me. They're not in sync with me. But finding what is beautiful, and literally every place we've been, there has been something, they do something that nobody else does, or they make some food, they arrange ingredients in a way that nobody's ever, and it's just beautiful. And that you can meet people in that moment of that experience or that thing and share that with them. And they're always, that's the other thing we've discovered, people are proud of their cultures, as they should be, because as I said, everybody has something beautiful. So you can meet people on the level of, they are sharing what they think is beautiful about their culture, and we are responding in sort of an authentic way and saying, yes, you're right, this is beautiful, and I see it, and I didn't know about it before you showed me. Thank you so much. And there's that moment of connection between people. And for all the talk of, travel being bad for the environment, that's all important, but it is also important to say those connections that are being made, the authentic connections that are being made, I think those are important too, because that experience, that personal experience, when you see the humanity in that other person, you realize, oh my gosh, this person, they are just as real as, before you travel there, it's like an abstraction. The rest of the world is an abstraction. But as you travel, you realize it's not an abstraction at all. These people are real. Their feelings are real. And when tragedy befalls people, and when poverty exists, it haunts you. In a way, it should haunt you, you know. And you have to carry that. You carry the beauty and the burden of knowing that there's all this misery in the world. And I don't know. That's part of, I think, what being a human is. I think it's important to open your mind up to both the beauty and the trauma of the world, because it's extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think being in the world helps you see that it's everywhere. Beauty is everywhere, and pain is everywhere.
Yes.
So I think that what I've heard you say is, you know, as far as like advice to anybody who's considering doing it, be open-minded, be flexible, do things that scare you anyway, go places that you wouldn't normally go. Put aside your American ideals of what other countries are. What else would you add to that list?
I think the big thing is it's so much less scary than you think it is.
Don't be afraid.
It's not that hard. And as an American, I'm sure you have lots of different listeners, but if you speak English, the world is so easy for you to travel, especially now with smartphones. Even if you're in a country where you can't speak, Google is there. But it's just not that scary. It's not that scary to give up your stuff. And it's not that scary to go live in the rest of the world. You get used to it so much more quickly than you would ever imagine.
The reality is, so when you're in a tourist area, obviously people are tired of tourists, and they might be impatient and they might be frustrated with tourists. But anywhere that isn't a tourist area, if you are in trouble and you turn to somebody and you say, I need help, people will, oh, what can I do? And if you know, we all have smartphones, because if you don't speak English, you can translate. And people are so generous, and everybody knows that feeling of being in an uncomfortable situation. That is a universal feeling like, oh, I don't understand, I'm uncomfortable. And most people want to help you. And so it's like the worst that can happen to you, literally the worst that can happen to you in most situations, if you're smart, if you do your due diligence, you might be a little embarrassed. You might have to ask somebody for help. But that's as bad as, excuse me, I need help. Can you help me? Mm-hmm. That's as bad as it gets, for the most part. And I had all these preconceptions about the rest of the world and about travel in general, that it would be really discombobulating and really stressful. And it's not. All you have to do is ask people for help, and they will, wherever you are.
I love that. I think that's so important. We don't like asking for help. You know, maybe it's American pride or whatever. But we want to be able to handle everything ourselves, and we don't want to be embarrassed, because
Toxic
being embarrassed is painful.
Well, I do think Americans have a distorted view of so much of the rest of the world. When we moved to Mexico City, we had quite a few friends get in touch with us and send us articles saying, have you heard how dangerous Mexico is? You know, it's really a risky place. And when we were in Bulgaria, same sort of thing. And, you know, we're not stupid and naive. Bad things do happen in certain places of the world. And we did our research about Mexico, and it was like, yeah, there are areas you don't want to go. But the fact of the matter is, if you come to the United States, there are parts of any big U.S. city you probably don't want to go. And if you're a woman traveler, you have to think about where you're going in the United States and how you behave. So you have to be aware of those things. But for the most part, the media loves to play these things up and make other countries, you know, seem scary. And
it is important to do your research and do your due diligence and talk to people and know what not to do, and to be respectful of local, and listen to your gut. That's important too. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, the world is no more scary than the United States. That the dangers that exist in the United States exist everywhere else, and vice versa.
I mean, frankly, there were so many mass shootings while we were overseas, and people would just look at us and be like, there was another shooting in the United States. It's like, well, honestly, coming back to the United States and being out in a shopping mall or a movie theater, that is not far from my head. That this is a country of mass shootings. And I mean, when we lived in Miami, we heard gunfire on a somewhat regular basis. We never heard gunfire living here. There was never a moment living overseas where we felt threatened by well, I guess our apartment in Bulgaria caught on fire, but even that happened. But other than that, no. I mean, we're just repeating ourselves now. The United States is no less scary than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I get that question all the time about, being a solo female traveler. Like, do you feel safe? People always ask me if I carry weapons or, and my response to them is very similar. Like, I'm not a dummy, but I'm not going to live my life in fear and like miss out on my life either. So I think that that's important for people to realize. And again, that goes along with like the more you travel, the more people you meet, the more things you see, the more you realize people are people are people. It doesn't matter what country you're in. So,
and most people are really kind and decent. They really are. I mean, it's just true. It's changed my attitude towards humanity, towards human nature, because I used to think people were basically jerks, and I don't feel that way anymore.
Oh my God, I love that. I think that's the perfect note to like just leave it on so people remember, like, people aren't jerks. Brent and Michael, where can people find you on the interwebs if they want to come follow you?
We have a website, brentandmichaelaregoingplaces.com. We post pretty regularly there. I do our Instagram. It's sort of my thing. And I love posting pictures of where we're at and telling stories about things. So our Instagram is also Brent and Michael Are Going Places. Brent does Twitter
and Facebook. So we're on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, we're pretty available.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll leave links to all of these in the show notes as well.
Wonderful.
But thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. This is fun.
Yeah, I had a great time, and your stories are all really interesting, and I hope that we can meet up on the road sometime.
Oh, yes.
It might be sooner than you think.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be. We're all stuck in the Pacific Northwest right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, and I hope everybody tunes in next week for the next episode of Deliberate Living. We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on YouTube, or sign up for email updates every time something new is published. I'll see you next time on Deliberate Living, and until then, keep your life on the DL too.